Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Beijing. We begin our show today with the role between India and Pakistan. The Indian government has revoked the special status given to the state of Jammu and Kashmir in its constitution in a move that many say is meant to gain more control of the region. But Kashmir has long been a flashpoint in ties with neighboring Pakistan, which says the move is illegal. Before we loop in our panelists from different sides, take a look at the latest.
Pakistan has downgraded diplomatic relations and suspended trade with India. The decision was made in a high-level meeting chaired by Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan as a response to New Delhi's scrapping of the special status of India-controlled Kashmir. Islamabad says it will take the Kashmir issue to the United Nations and has called on its armed forces to remain on alert.
We are linking our Independence Day celebrations with the right of self-determination movement of Kashmiris, and from Azad Kashmir to Indian-occupied Kashmir, and from it to all the bizarre streets, towns, villages, and cities of Pakistan.
Article 370 of the Indian Constitution is considered a temporary provision which granted autonomous status to Jammu and Kashmir in 1949. It means that the Indian Parliament's powers are limited. The state government has to be consulted to make decisions regarding the state, except decisions on defense, foreign affairs, finance, and communications. India said the region's special status had hindered Kashmir's development, and it wanted to fully integrate the region with the rest of the country.
Jammu and Kashmir is a part of India, an integral part. There is no legal or constitutional dispute about it.
Critics of the decision have called this move undemocratic and unconstitutional, since local leaders were not asked about it. But most opposition parties in India have supported the move. In the election campaign of 2019, Mr. Modi's party committed to scrapping Article 370. Following the change in Kashmir status, the Indian Army and Air Force have been put on high alert. Restrictions on public gatherings are still enforced in the India-controlled Kashmir region. Security has become tighter, with police officers on more frequent patrols, conducting security checks on the streets. For China's part, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Chunying expressed concern over the situation in Kashmir. She said both sides should refrain from taking actions that could change the status quo and escalate tensions. She added Beijing hopes the two countries can resolve their dispute over the territory through dialogue and safeguard regional stability. Why is India appeared to be bent on changing the status of Kashmir? At what cost?
So where is the crisis heading for? Let's turn to our panelists. In Islamabad, Pakistan, we invited Sultan Ali, a defense and security analyst who's also a former Pakistani Air Force Group captain. And also in Beijing, we have Rong Ying, the Vice President of China Institute of International Studies. Later, we are going to talk on the phone to an Indian scholar as well. Let me ask you first, Mr. Ali, about what do you make of the timing of this change from the Indian side? Do you think the downgrading of diplomatic ties between the two countries now is the best way to solve the problem? Is it?
No, it is not. Thank you so much for having me on your show. As to your question about the timing, you got to look at it in the perspective that in the very near past, the Pakistani Prime Minister was in Washington, D.C., where he had a one-on-one meeting with President Donald Trump, in which President Donald Trump surprised everybody by stating that he had been approached by the Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, regarding Kashmir, and Donald Trump actually offered his services to act as a mediator or an arbitrator to resolve the crisis. Now, this was seen as a very pleasant surprise, but it was immediately denounced by the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, who said that no such talk had taken place, but however Mr. Trump again reiterated a few days later. Now, as far as the timing is concerned, you see at the moment in the region a couple of things are happening. For example, in Afghanistan, there is an election scheduled to be held in September, which had already been postponed twice before. And the Taliban are holding direct talks with the Americans, and the government of Pakistan has been asked by the US to act as a mediator to bring the Taliban on the talking table.
So
now,
your
the window of
point is,
opportunity here is short.
So your point is, sir?
My point is that that the talks in Afghanistan is very important. Secondly, there is a crisis brewing up between the United States and Iran, in which Pakistan is expected to play a role, and India was taken on the back foot. Although Mr. Modi had promised his constituencies that he is going to downgrade the status of Kashmir, but he acted in a hurry because he thought that Pakistan was gaining the upper hand as far as relations with America were concerned, as far as Pakistan's importance in trying to bring about peace in Afghanistan is concerned, and India was feeling left out of the whole process because China, Russia, the USA and Pakistan were in the forefront of getting peace into Afghanistan.
It seems that you are suggesting it's very tactical from the Indian side to do what it is doing right now regarding Kashmir. Let me go to you, Mr. Rong. You've been following the latest development in Asia for quite some time. What do you make of the timing now? I mean, after every political decision, there are usually quite sufficient reasons.
Indeed, I think there are a lot of speculations about the timing, which is of India's decision to put sort of to implement. Actually, it's a long-term kind of a pledge. It's a part of the. It's actually a major part of the political platform or manifesto of the BJP, Hindu Nationalist Party, and but they've been there for a long time. I mean, why this time? Why in such a hurry? And I think to some extent I share in Pakistan panelists sort of explanation about this. But I would add possibly one more point is that the political sort of factor for the government, since I think
which government?
For India government, for the BJP government, of course, which has won a big majority, and it is I think they got to sort of answer to the request or the demand of its basis, its constituency, and that is being also manifested by the fact that the decision, despite such a controversy and a lot of questions in terms of legalities, it's being welcomed by certainly by the BJP supporters, but also by some of the other parties.
If you think about it, it's an emotional issue for both countries, both India and Pakistan. So if the government takes actions that would appeal to nationalism in any of these two countries, there would be very strong reaction, and probably in a positive quote-unquote way in either of the two countries. So Mr. Hali, now for Pakistan, what can you do?
Well, to start with, I must reiterate that Kashmir is a very emotional issue. In Pakistan, we may have, a political divide amongst various parties. But on one aspect, every Pakistani is united, and that is the future of Kashmir, because Kashmir, unfortunately, is an unfinished agenda of the 1947 partition. And India and Pakistan went to war in 1947 and 48, and the United Nations declared it as a disputed territory, and according to its resolution, the Kashmir issue is to be resolved by having a plebiscite in which the people of Kashmir will decide. Now, coming to your question, what can Pakistan do? One, India has taken a unilateral decision. This was supposed to be a bilateral issue. Beyond the United States resolution in 1972, the Pakistani then Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and then Indian Prime Minister Mrs. Indira Gandhi, they signed a Shimla agreement according to which it was decided that this is a bilateral issue. Now, if India takes a unilateral decision, not even consulting the leaders or the people of Kashmir, and decides to amalgamate Kashmir with itself, I think it has created a serious problem. Now, what are the options open for Pakistan? Pakistan is going for a diplomatic solution. It has decided to call upon its friends, specifically Beijing, and it has already talked to Turkey and to Malaysia and to Saudi Arabia, but it is going to take up the matter with the United Nations Security Council, because they are the ones who are most affected, because their resolutions have been torn to shreds. And we have a case that how can a bilateral issue be decided unilaterally? So we will pursue the diplomatic course first.
Because we also want to give some space and time to our Indian guests just to be fair in this discussion. Thank you very much, Mr. Hali. Let me now go to our Indian guest on the phone, MD Nalapat, UNESCO Peace Chair, joining us from New Delhi. Professor Nalapat, it's wonderful to hear your voice. Let me ask you directly to respond to your Pakistani colleague.
Well, you know, Pakistan was created on the basis of what is called the two-nation theory, that Hindus and Muslims are from different planets, different types of human beings, and they can never live together in peace. We don't believe that in India. There are 4 million Muslims in Kashmir. There are 168 million other Muslims in different parts of India, and this is to be compared with Pakistan, where the proportion of Hindus has gone down from around 40% to about 1%. So Pakistan believes that Hindus and Muslims cannot live together, and frankly that is the basis of Article 370, which many people in India believe was a big mistake. All that has been done is to remove that, and to remove the feeling. Now, supposing you say that Muslims have to be separated and nobody else can come into an area where Muslims are a majority, then we will ask our American and European friends. There are places in Europe and America that there's Muslim majority. Let them have
Professor Nalapat, I do not want to interrupt your answer, but there is one important thing that you haven't responded, which is why now, after all, you heard your Pakistani colleague back in several administrations earlier, there were already agreements signed by both sides agreeing that it is a bilateral issue. And now what Pakistanis see as unilateral approach by India certainly creates the problem. So if what your argument is correct, that argument could be viable in any time of this dispute, starting from the very beginning until today. So why is it now, particularly why, even after decades, both sides agree it is a problem bilaterally that needs to be resolved?
Well, the only bilateral resolution is the question of borders and boundaries. And Pakistan, for example, is doing an enormous amount of activity in the corner of Kashmir that it controls. I'm sure you know that a lot of activity is taking place in that particular location, and India has not really said very much. This is something that has taken place inside the territory of Kashmir, which is controlled by India. It is not a border issue at all, and therefore it is certainly not a bilateral issue. As for why now, Prime Minister Modi has just come back with a very big election victory, and therefore he feels strong enough to ensure that justice is done by removing this two-nation theory, this theory that Hindus and Muslims can never live in peace with each other. I again repeat, we have 4 million Muslims in Kashmir and 170 million Muslims in the rest of India.
Okay, got your point, sir. Let me also leave some time for Mr. Rong in Beijing to also have a say in this discussion, at least. Mr. Rong, you heard both sides. What both sides have argued have been the traditional arguments from both sides anyway for decades now. Why this thing's boiling out of control, apparently, that the two sides have to, in a way, degrade their diplomatic ties? It was not easy, after all, to upgrade the diplomatic ties decades ago.
Well, indeed, I think this has been very complicated, and I can see from our India colleagues, my friend, Professor
Very emotional,
Nalapat,
both
very
sides.
emotional indeed. The question is that out of the, different sort of two opposing sort of views of how this issue should be dealt with. There are some practical issues that need to be taken into account.
Give us some examples.
For example, the Kashmir issue is a kind of a dispute between India and Pakistan, and that has been recognized internationally. And in other words, anything deal with related to the Kashmir, the dispute has to follow some of the agreements or consensus understanding that has been reached. So taking a unilateral approach for whatever reasons is going to cause problems in the region.
Other examples you have?
The other issue is that because related to how sort of a national sort of integration or unification should be taken. I think India certainly has its argument and its way to do that, but again, it has been debatable, at least even in India, and about how it should proceed in a way, whether this is legal or constitutional. So and the third, and also equally important, is the regional implications. Right. Kashmir is such a flex point that have anything. Instability, really chaos would have implications, consequences for the region as a whole. And the region has enough trouble and enough problems. So I think it would be all the kind of right for to call upon India, a rising power, to respond, to take a responsible way to handle this issue.
About the last point, I do want to ask the question related to both guests from India and Pakistan. Professor Nalapat, to you first. Has India realized, or is that exactly the goal of doing that right now, that once India declared direct federal governance over the disputed region with Pakistan, India would be vulnerable in a way. Pakistan would also be vulnerable in a way to a third party or other parties' influence at the time of dramatic geopolitical changes in the region. Professor Nalapat, do you think India has thought about that, particularly about its immediate future? Professor.
Well, I'd like to say that in the 1990s, Bill Clinton, the Arab countries, the European countries, certainly, and China were all unanimous that India should make huge concessions to Pakistan. Nothing happened. Donald Trump made, if I may say so, I think, I'm not sure what he was thinking, but he made some very wrong remarks. And within minutes, the Indian spokesperson effectively called Donald Trump a liar. And that was repeated by the Indian foreign minister later, that the man was speaking an absolute untruth when he said that Prime Minister Modi asked him to intervene. There's absolute not. The point is, we are a country of 1.26 billion people, and I can assure you, we are very confident that no amount of pressure is going to work. And I can also tell you that any country that tries to put pressure will not be regarded as a friend of India. And after that, normal relations, whether people to people or cultural or commercial, will be affected. So
well, Professor Nalapat, as you may know, what you're saying right now are very harsh words. At the time of dramatic change, those harsh words really has a lot of weight. Having said that, though, let me also ask my Pakistani colleague as well, after asking the Indian colleague, Mr. Hali, has Pakistan realized that it would become more vulnerable to geopolitics in the region and probably even beyond once the tension with India escalates, and sometimes these kind of vulnerability could be spinning out of control for either of the two parties?
Yes, I'm glad you asked this question because it is very important to consider. Pakistan at the moment is trying to act as responsibly as it can. Now, you see, my friend from India, he's been the right word you used, very harsh. One doesn't talk about the president of any country, be it USA or anywhere else, in such harsh terms, because whatever Donald Trump said was denied by the Indian Ministry of External Affairs. But to date, it has not been denied by Prime Minister Modi. And only 3 days after that, the Energy Secretary of America was asked about this, and he said that you do not expect our president to tell lies. So obviously, Mr. Modi must have approached him. And even 3 days later, President Donald Trump repeated his offer of mediation. Of course, he added that if India and Pakistan approach me. Now, as for your question about vulnerability, yes, we are feeling very vulnerable, because please also remember that Narendra Modi, after having changed the status quo or removed the autonomy of Indian-occupied Kashmir, has said that he would also you see, like to liberate Azad Jammu Kashmir, which is, with Pakistan, and also Gilgit-Baltistan. Now, these are
exactly what I'm talking about, Mr. Hali. What you have just said about the president of another country, which does not necessarily have any direct impact on the two countries that we're talking about, which is India, Pakistan, has become an issue for both of you. And there are issues that you do not have to deal with. That is one of those. When it's bilateral issues, why would it depend so much on the credibility of a third party's president? And that is exactly the result when you're becoming vulnerable to third parties or other parties. Mr. Hali, has Pakistan ever thought about that? Because this is a very critical issue at this moment. Both India and Pakistan are nuclear powers. This region in the Asia-Pacific, we already see two trade wars. One between China and the United States. The other is ongoing as well between Japan and South Korea. Now, India and Pakistan now, you are probably almost quote-unquote successful in putting yourselves once again as a third point of flashpoint here in this region. This is very much making both of your countries vulnerable. I'm really wondering, have Islamabad ever thought about that, particularly when you think about the future solutions to this crisis? Mr. Hali, briefly from you, sir.
Yes, very briefly, this is exactly what our Prime Minister said in his speech to the Parliament. He said that it can lead to war, but this war is going to be a very deadly war, because unfortunately, both India and Pakistan are equipped with nuclear weapons, which is a war which is going to annihilate the total populations of both India and Pakistan, and its nuclear fallout will affect the entire region. So actually, we need to draw back from such a brinkmanship and instead sit down and talk about it. But for the last 3 to 4 years, we have been asking India to come to the tables and discuss it bilaterally. But India has been placing a condition to the talks, saying that you have been responsible for the terrorism or the terror attacks which have taken place in India, and unless you stop supporting terrorism, we are not going to talk to you. Now, you see, unless you talk to each other, you're not going to reach anywhere, and we have to draw back from this brinkmanship.
Okay, got it. I got the points both from the Indian side and the Pakistan side. It's very important that we hear both voices. Mr. Rong, I want to come to you. Now, we have to figure out the solution. That's why we need to talk about it, right? It's not just a crisis that's in front of our eyes, but rather a solution that should be in the sight. What is the solution? Is SCO, as some of our earlier screen has demonstrated, the SCO platform to resolve it? SCO, after all, has just included 2 new members, India, Pakistan. And will that be the way? Or a more multilateral approach in a different format, or bilateral approach from China, or from Russia, or from other countries? Mr. Rong. Your thoughts?
I have no idea, and
no
I don't see a solution right now. I only hope that tension will not escalate. And I would add one more dimension in addition to the Indo-Pak relationship, which has already been very bad. You see the diplomatic relations have been downgraded, the ambassador, the high commissioner has been expelled, and ties, economic trade ties have been cut. This is very bad. This is actually, by the way, what the two sides, particularly the Indian side, has been working on, looking for in the past years, if not this administration. That another dimension which is equally important is the minority groups, the Muslims in India and other sort of states that have been enjoyed more or less similar privileges like Jammu and Kashmir. The way that I think this India government has done has raised a lot of concern and apprehension what would be done. So that could have implications for India, for the stability of India, for the development of India, which is literally the argument I think the Prime Minister Modi is making, that they want to scrap this provision for the sake of development, for the sake of stability. So as for SCO, I only hope and I only wish that with the spirit of SCO, where I think both India and Pakistan has subscribed to when they joined that, they would be able to work together to find a way to address issues and with caution and restraint. But at this moment, I don't see any solutions.
Even though we really hope there will be some quick de-escalation of tensions going on in that region between the two countries. But for now, I want to thank the three of you for joining us. From India, MD Nalapad, Professor, thank you very much. From Pakistan, Mr. Sultan Ali, thank you so much, sir. And last but not least, the Rong Ying in Beijing, really appreciate it.